Let's podcast. You okay there? You blowing your nose?
Trying to catch up with all this action.
Dude, this is like true after dark, like behind the scenes, blowing the nose and everything. I'm gonna start that over again. You get the podcast live YouTube exclusive on that part. I'll edit that part out for the podcast audio only. Let's podcast live after dark. Joe, we lost the parlay, but the Canes won the game. That's the most important part of the night. My $5 lit that bad boy on fire for our parlay with DraftKings. It's okay. The Canes did not win the second period. No big deal, but they won the game. That was the most important part. And I'm trying to open up this dark arts bourbon without spilling it all over my computer because the last time they won and we did an after dark and I was here, I poured the dark arts. So we're going to have to continue doing the dark arts. Thoughts on the game, Joe? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. You good, Joe?
Yeah, it keeps flipping back to my MacBook audio. Can you hear me?
Oh. Yeah, I can hear you. You're fine. You sound good. Just come through the mic.
Okay, good.
Anyway.
Yeah, so obviously when we set the parlay, I was thinking New York would come out and play mad from being down and really being in control of game one, right? And then not winning. And then game two, obviously they had the 3-goal lead. They ended up losing. So my thought process was the game would either be tied or even the Islanders would be up in the first period. And instead, Brent Burns scores 4 minutes into the game. And here you go. The Canes have this thing again where the Islanders are chasing them. And to have a 2-0 at the end of one really turned out to be a blessing because the Islanders outplayed them in the second. And the third period goes the way that the third period goes. I thought Freddie was really the difference there in the third period. I do wonder if Patrick Waugh was perhaps getting a little cute with the Sorokin start. I didn't really necessarily think Varlamov was a problem in either game one or two.
Yeah.
But I did think, obviously, and so did he, that Sorokin was a problem in this game for the Islanders.
Well, maybe they didn't have a chair for him at the Islanders building because I know that was a bit of a drama at PNC Arena. So they didn't have a chair for him. So might as well just put you on the ice, Sorokin, so you can see what you can do. Yeah, I was curious about goaltending going into tonight because we talked about it going into game 3. What do you do with Freddie Andersen, who has not seen this much action in a row, right? So how is he going to play? We'll save the Freddie Andersen discussion here in a second. And then would Patrick Waugh go to the other goalie given how the last game ended in the fashion that it did? Do you go for the change of pace, throw something else out there? Because they had to win this game. This was a desperate Islanders team. And to your point, by putting Sorokin in, it showed a little bit of that desperation. And I thought the Islanders showed to be a broken team that had carried over from Monday night. So I give the Islanders a lot of credit from Waugh pulling Sorokin when he did, the Islanders doing their best to make this a game in the second period, and the way that they skated their asses off in the third period because they knew if they could not get over on the Canes, this thing was going to be a wrap one way or the other. It might not get wrapped up on Saturday, but it's, as we know, very difficult to come back from 3-0 deficits in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So to me, the Islanders kind of played the way you expected them to play. The question for the Carolina Hurricanes were, how is Freddie Andersen going to play, 3 games straight, and how are they going to be without Brett Pesce on the ice, and how are they going to rotate their defensemen with Tony DeAngelo in the mix? You brought up Brent Burns, Dmitry Orlov, Jalen Chatfield on that third goal, finding I get the secondary assist on that, which ended up being with Aho. To me, I mean, was it a perfect defensive game? Not necessarily, but they certainly did enough. And obviously Freddie Andersen did enough with the Dobson save early in the first period. And of course, what we saw there, I think it was Anders Lee. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Anders Lee was the one who clipped Freddie Andersen, who fell. And then he ended up making another glove save, the second huge glove save of the night with the Romanov shot. So, I mean, Freddie saved their ass in the third period, man, with that goal. With that save, and now they're up 3-0.
Yeah, and I thought for the Islanders, again, yes, do you try to get a spark after losing those first 2 games? And
Right.
as you mentioned, the way that the 3rd period really kind of fell apart in game 2, it just felt like, was that really the reason? And, I think I had mentioned, either to you during one of the games or on one of the shows, it's gotta be tough when you're Sorokin and you have the year that you did the previous year and you're the primary reason they're in the playoffs.
Hmm.
You're a Vezina finalist, and now Patrick Waugh comes in this year, and obviously down the stretch, Varlamov was the better goalie. No, necessarily no problem there, but it does as a goalie, it has to hurt more if Patrick Waugh, arguably the greatest goaltender of all time, doesn't think you're very good. Or
Right.
in the very least, and that's not fair to the conversations that he has with Sorokin. Perhaps, I would assume he has a lighter touch with him than the way I'm spelling it out. But
Yeah.
I think it's harder for Sorokin to take it from Patrick Waugh to be like, it's like if you're this great 3-point shooter and Larry Bird is like, you really can't shoot. And then now you're sitting there going, well, no, I can. Just give me a chance, right? So maybe there's some of that there, but I think it's hard, that so much of goaltending, particularly in the playoffs, is mental.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel like you necessarily have your coach's support, and again, this is not just some normal coach. Patrick Waugh comes in January, and they're able to win, particularly down the stretch is when they started getting things going. So not quibbling with his coaching decisions, more of the mental side of it for Sorokin when that is your coach and he has the resume that he does.
So in the YouTube comments, I think it was what is this? Terrific Comics and Pop Culture. This is a hell of a username. What an ugly win. And this is what an ugly win is. 3-0 in the series. You'll take it. I mean, that's kind of the general attitude that I had with this game. This is from, let's see, Stealthy. Freddie will never play, will never pay his own tab again after those saves. Now, he was absolutely fantastic in this game. And
I mean, it's still the first round though. Like,
yeah.
so first of all, this shows the Canes' growth.
Hmm.
All of those series where we wanted them to go on the road and beat Boston in game 3. We wanted them to go on the road and beat the Rangers in game 3, and they couldn't do it.
Yep.
So this shows that growth. Even last year, they go to the island, they go on the road, they lose game 3.
Hmm.
And you're like, please, pretty please,
Can you?
stop playing with your food. Stop
Yeah.
making this more difficult than it needs to be.
Yes.
And, I think this shows that. And to have the defense play the way that it did, well, almost like, okay, that was almost to me like, oh, you think we're going to be off a beat without Pesh. Well,
Mhm.
look what we can do. And obviously Orlov with the goal and Burns with the goal. I mean, what else do you want from those guys?
From Ray in the YouTube comments, ugly win equals birthday present, right, Joe?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's Ray's birthday too. So happy birthday to Ray. And yeah, now we'll see. I mean, you and I were both expecting this thing to go to Tuesday and game 5 back here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much left that the Islanders have. And that's not to say that they've quit. They clearly didn't. I mean, the way that they played in the second period and the third period, it suggested that there's a lot of fight left. And kind of like the Canes last year. Remember, the Canes were swept by Florida.
Hmm.
It just so happened to be a bunch of one score games. This is the first one score game of the series, game 1's 3-1 with an empty netter there late. But that's kind of the way that I look at it. You can have these close series. It doesn't mean a team is given up. It does become again a mental aspect, and it becomes demoralizing when you're down 3-0 because it's really hard to dig out of it, and
Yeah.
you fail sometimes to realize you just have to do it one period and one game at a time. You can't fast forward ahead.
Well, it's just like Ryan on the YouTube comments points out, Freddie had serious glove focus all night, just snatching dreams. That's definitely one way to put it. You brought up the Florida series from last year, and I had that thought with it's funny. ESPN sends the alert out after the game wraps up. If like my phone actually wants to unlock so I can pull down the way that the the ESPN breaker came through. Islanders fall at home in game 3 despite outshooting Carolina 31-22. Where have I heard that before, Joe? Where have I heard that before? So when you brought up
every
Florida, like, basically like every game in the playoffs last year for the Carolina Hurricanes. So to see that, I can see where the frustration is there for the Islanders. The Islanders are not playing poorly. It's just that the Carolina Hurricanes are better on multiple fronts, even down a key defenseman in Brett Pesce. When Freddie Andersen is locked in like that and making those saves, yeah, some pretty decent shots that should probably go in didn't because of him. And again, I don't think Canes fans are feeling bad for the Islanders because we saw a shit ton of that last year to make things go longer than they need to, or in the case of the Florida Panthers series, they got swept. And I remember we had a conversation with Rod Brindamore after the season wrapped up. We did the post-mortem. And I remember he was, and maybe you can correct me on this, but I got the sense that when we talked to him, that he pushed back on the idea of like, yeah, we got swept. I get it. But go watch those games. Go watch how close those games were. See how close they were from turning that around. And maybe we win a few of these. Maybe we win that series. Maybe the Islanders feel a little bit like that coming out of this, given the way that Freddie Andersen has been playing so far. And the other thing, too, about the Carolina Hurricanes tonight, and the defense stepped up. I don't have the stat in front of me, but I think at last check, Andrei Svechnikov has not scored a goal in the series yet, but Andrei Svechnikov has certainly made his presence felt. I think most importantly, you remember when I asked earlier today when we were at Longleaf Swine, I asked, hey, Tony DeAngelo, don't do anything dumb. Like, don't screw it up with your minutes. Just, keep it clean, man. Keep it clean. I think Svechnikov has only had that first penalty in that one penalty in the first game. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think you can ask much more than that. He's got 4 or 5 assists so far. Again, I don't have the stats in front of me, but
he had 2 tonight. So and that gets back to the decision, that I was questioning. Well, why do you move Svech? Why do you move Jarvis? Well, you're part of it's to get Svech going a little bit and make sure that he is an important part of this. Because you're right, they spent a lot of time last year talking about we didn't have our full set.
Right.
We didn't have our full complement. We didn't have our lineup. And it wasn't just, 1 or 2 injuries. It was a major injury.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go back, and even I had to go back and look at watching game 2 of the Rangers and Capitals and seeing Max Pacioretty, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. They signed that guy to be, a goal scorer, a difference maker in the playoffs. And obviously he hurts his Achilles and you never get a chance to see him. And then they didn't make a move at the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, not only are you healthy for the most part, right? You're still missing Fast and Pesce now, but you also made the moves at the deadline that you did to kind of bolster the roster and also kind of signal to the players that, hey, we're making a run at this thing. And Kuznetsov, obviously in game 1, was a super dangerous player.
Yeah.
I think you're seeing some of that depth again here. Puck control, and I believe it was the second period where I was watching the ESPN2 feed, and they're like, the Hurricanes are just choking the life out of this game right now, and they were with their puck possession and control.
From Aaron in the YouTube comments, Freddie will haunt the dreams of the Islanders like Kruger. Yes, I'm sure. They are cursing Freddie Andersen on the island, much like folks are doing that back here with Bobrovsky.
Yeah.
I watched and to your point, you mentioned something about how this is just the first round, right? And there is some growth here. I think the ultimate takeaway, given how they've played so far in this series, is they're making the big plays when needed. Guys are stepping up when needed. We've asked a lot of Aho. Aho obviously steps up today. We've asked a lot from Andrei Svechnikov. He has stepped up, even if it hasn't shown itself in the scoring, him actually scoring goals. And of course, with the goaltending, Freddie Andersen has been excellent, which now gets us to Saturday, 2:00, with a chance to wrap this thing up. I have not seen Rod Brindamore post game yet. This is something we can obviously talk about a little bit more on a normal podcast on Monday or after Saturday's game, depending on how it goes. I'll be curious to see what Rod Brindamore does with Andersen in a game 4 situation. Do you put him out there again with a chance to wrap this thing up and then just sit back and relax until the second round of games goes? Because if you wrap this up, and I have a feeling the Rangers will wrap this thing up relatively quick too with the Washington Capitals, the other series might not. And, the NHL is not going to start. It's not going to start this next series before everybody else. So you have a chance to just chill for a little bit, and maybe that's what Andersen does. I'll be curious to see what Rod does with the goalie situation, because Kochetkov can go in there and win them a game.
Yeah, and I think Mike Maniscalco had advanced this after game 2, that if you're in a situation where you're up 3-0 and you feel like you're in control and you have this now relative short turnaround, if you will, a day game after a Thursday night game, that there is a little risk in putting Kochetkov in for game 4. I would still err on the side of just going to Freddie and saying, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And because the way he's playing, he's totally and completely locked in. That doesn't mean they can't win game 4 without him. Obviously they can, but to your point, if you're going to have some time off and you don't feel like there's any danger of getting him injured, then what's the true value there? Because you already know with Kochetkov what he can do in the playoffs. You already know in an emergency situation, you already know in injury situation that he's going to come in and play with aggression and be confident. That's what he is. But I think you see today with Sorokin, and listen, they're not all terrible goals. I'm sure he would like at least 2 of them back, but
Sure.
It just ends up showing you kind of what the Canes were doing early in the season, playing left-handed, where when you don't have that outstanding goaltending, even in a 3-2 game, it becomes this ultimate difference. So, Varlamov comes in, doesn't allow the goal, but Canes were able to get to Sorokin, get the 3 that they needed to win the game.
So going to the YouTube comments again, I have not seen the Brindamore press conference. I'll probably watch it or listen to it after the fact. From Jess, Rod Brindamore in a post game, we were okay. From Ryan, Rod had a great clip tonight for are the Canes winning when he said this kind of night.
One of our favorite games.
That is our favorite game to play, and maybe he can help us play it. Luke DeCock, columnist, News and Observer, joining us now on the Heister Automotive Group hotline. Luke, I have not had a chance to hear the Rod Brindamore post-game press conference, but based on the YouTube comments, it sounds like Rod was doing the classic. We were fine. You couldn't tell if they won or lost based on his comments tonight.
He was asked what the message was going into the third period, and he said it doesn't matter because they didn't listen to it.
Okay. Got it. But you know what?
Yeah, but hey, sometimes your goalie's got to win a game for you. The stall line, didn't have a lot to show for it, but they would go out there and grind for 40 seconds, and then it seemed like that whatever line came on next would get a great chance. So it's Hurricanes hockey that way. I think, the 2 goals they would absolutely want back, leaving guys alone there right in front to get the rebounds. But, Freddie had the big save in the first and the big save in the third, and that's the game. That's the difference between 3-2 and 4-3. So Hurricanes have won 5 of 6 playoff games on the road against the Islanders, which is, incredible considering they're 3-17 against everybody else under Rod Brindamore. But this is not a place that's been particularly hard for them to win.
Yeah.
And they managed to gave Ilya Sorokin the shortest starting goaltender tenure and since that Pope who got poisoned.
So Joe and I started the podcast talking about that, and one of our YouTube comments pointed out that Wah went kind of galaxy brain on this. I could see why you want to put him in there for a change of pace. You were desperate. I thought the Islanders' desperation truly showed itself in the third period, and why I don't necessarily mind the way that the Canes played. They knew they had to grind that thing out. As you said, you got to win ugly sometimes. Sometimes you need that big save. That's why Freddie Andersen's here. Like Kuznetsov said, after game 1, that's why he gets paid. That's why he's here. What did you think of putting Sorokin in there and then giving him the quick yank after that?
Yeah, I mean, I think after you give up 5 unanswered goals, you've got to do something to change the mojo. So, Patrick Waugh talked this morning about when he was playing, he was the Ferrari and Brian Hayward was the Cadillac. One was steady and the other was flashy. And, Varlamov has been their Cadillac. And so now let's see what the Ferrari can do. And now the Ferrari's upside down on the Cross Bronx Parkway, smoking, and the Cadillac came back in. I don't have a problem with it from a momentum perspective, from a coaching perspective, from a mojo perspective. That said, Sorokin was not good, and the Islanders were terrible in front of him. I mean, Robert Bortuzzo might as well have been playing for the Hurricanes tonight. At one point, his Corsi was 0-4-19 against. I mean, that's like historically bad. So, I didn't have a problem with it. If I'm Patrick Waugh, I'm looking for anything I can do to push some buttons and get more out of my team. And I think he did get more out of his team. The effort was closer to game one. But they've got to score some goals, and they've got to stop the Hurricanes from scoring goals, which, the Orlov and Aho goals in particular they're bad goals. They're bad goals. They gave both those guys too much space, and the goalie's got to make a save, and he didn't. And Freddie Andersen did, and that's kind of playoff hockey.
Another thing that Joe and I were talking about before you popped on was what to do with Freddie Andersen going into Saturday's game 4 to wrap this thing up. It's a 2:00 game. I know we've been kind of tipping this. Maniscalco, we talked about it with him. I know you and I have talked about this. How do you think Rod handles what happens on Saturday with Korchekov there, but Freddie Andersen clearly locked in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, this is the first time all year Freddie's played 3 consecutive games. And it helped because you had the 2 extra days off, Tuesday and Wednesday between games. But now you've got a short turnaround to a 2:00 start on Saturday, and you're up 3-0. So, it wouldn't shock me if Korchekov plays. I think that's the smart move. If you're trying to win the Stanley Cup, you're trying to win 16 games. Freddie's only got, we know for a fact over the course of the last 3 years, Freddie's only got so much tread on his tires.
Right.
And obviously the time off in the middle of the year is going to help with that. But you're talking about 2 months of goaltending, not 2 weeks. And so I think there's a pretty strong argument for playing Korchekov on Saturday in the long term. That said, you got a chance to sweep. You get a lot of time off if you can sweep. And Freddie does give you your best chance to sweep. I think it's going to be really hard for Rod Brind'Amour, hockey guy that he is, to go away from a winning lineup, especially now without Pesce in defense and some of those guys obviously starting to get a little banged up. It's tougher to kind of say, oh, hey, we're playing Columbus on a Tuesday. Let's throw Korchekov in there.
Speaking of getting banged up, any update on Seth Jarvis? I know he had a weird collision. I think it was with
he came back to start the third. So there's did not see him in the room. Jalen Chatfield got banged up at one point. He was out there at the end. So, other than the Jesper Fast news from before the game, which we did not ask Brind'Amour about Fast during his pregame availability, but then he dropped it with Tripp that Fast is done for the playoffs. And then we followed it up with him just now, and he basically said that he was re-examined yesterday and the news wasn't good and they're not expecting him back. Don Waddell told me that he's going to be reevaluated in 4 weeks, but that it doesn't look good. So as far as the Hurricanes are concerned, they're moving on without him, which is obviously bad news and sort of not what anyone was expecting. They're still thinking they can get Brett Pesce back. That hasn't changed. They just don't really have a timeline yet. So whatever injury it is, it's one that doesn't have sort of a hard and fast timeline, but they do think they can potentially get him back after this series. So, certainly they're going to need him if they're going to go on a long playoff run.
Okay. 15 minutes from D'Angelo, Luke. As you mentioned, Pesce not playing in this game. What did you think of their reconfigured defense? And it seemed like a lot of them had shots other than my man Burns, who scored on the first goal and stopped shooting.
God, what's the context? What's the context for that? Tony DeAngelo had 2 really good defensive plays in the first period. He did no harm, and really, A, with him, and B, coming into the lineup in the middle of a pretty hard-fought playoff series, first game on the road, that's all you can ask. And so I thought Tony played a solid game. Obviously, his minutes got cut in the third period, but, he seemed to mesh well with Brady Shea, who's spent the entire season playing with Brett Pesce. That's a tough adjustment to make, but I thought Tony was fine. And the places where things could have broken down with DeAngelo, it didn't happen. He was able to make plays or get the puck out or disarmed a couple of rushes, and he didn't contribute a ton offensively, but they didn't need him to really. And again, with him, if he's not giving up chances and he's in this case neutralizing some chances, that's a win. I mean, that's a big win for the Hurricanes.
All right, Luke, we appreciate the time. Get back to the grind of a columnist life, and we will talk to you later.
All right, see you, fellas.
All right, man, take it easy. Luke DeCock, columnist, News and Observer, joining us on the After Dark. All right, Joe, it's your birthday. I can tell you're sleepy. Ready to call it a night?
I still don't see my owl.
Oh, you're serious about the owl on the graphic?
The
I mean,
the moon's there. The moon looks good.
look, well, that's an AI crescent moon. They just updated Photoshop with some new AI capabilities, so I can take this like outdoor frozen pond aesthetic and see if I can add an owl. Where do you want the owl? Do you want like the owl flying? Do you want the owl on the ice? Do you want the owl with skates on? What do you
No,
want?
just maybe between the moon and the flag. Right? It indicates.
Oh.
Well, you don't need it for game 4 because game 4 is a 2:00 game.
Yeah. That will not be. Do I have to do an afternoon ice session? Do I have to do a new background for that?
We'll improvise, but
Okay, we'll do.
I mean, I think the ultimate takeaway here is the Canes did what we've wanted them to do now. Let's go back
Yeah.
to the Nashville series, for goodness sake.
Yes.
Right? Where you feel like they're the better team and they would just get on the road and maybe it was a little bit, oh, it's not Jordan Stahl. You don't have the change and, the face-off numbers are a little bit off. Truth of the matter is, though, this is the best version that we've seen of the Canes. This is the healthiest, even with Pesci and Fast being out of the lineup. This is the healthiest, the top end of not to downplay Pesci. He's obviously a really good player, but
Mhm.
there's a difference to me between losing Pesci and losing Svech, right? They're just not constructed to lose a top end wing like Svech. So when you lose Pesci, yeah, you do actually have NHL experience who you can put into the lineup and get the kind of night you got out of Tony DeAngelo tonight. And there's more. I think for Tony DeAngelo, there's more. You got to remember he hasn't been playing. He did get in at the end of the regular season.
I don't know if there's more out of Tony, man. I don't know that.
Well,
I mean, like I said,
the one thing we know about Tony is he can be a contributor on the power play, even
yes,
if it's not
can.
the top power play. He
Okay.
can be a contributor on the power play. Obviously, on the road, you're not looking for the Hurricanes to have that many power play chances, right?
No.
So I just think the biggest takeaway from this game is the Hurricanes go up 3-0. I believe it's the first time since they swept the Islanders in the second round of 19, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're
Yeah,
right. Yes.
unless it was last year and my brain is already mistaken that.
No, because remember last year the whole thing was they couldn't win on the road.
Okay.
So
It was 2 years ago with the Rangers on the road. So
that's
this has
right,
been
too.
a hurdle for them. This has been a hurdle for them, and they've also had to, like, going back to the Predators series, they've going back even to 19, Joe, with Washington going 7 games, obviously you have different expectations in different years, but even these last few years when they've been considered a front runner and a favorite, they've struggled in games like this. So for them to win this game, it's important. Now you're in that driver's seat, and they can get to the good problem of, well, now they have too much time off, right? You can already guess the
That's a
talking
luxury.
point
Yeah, I was
before
gonna say
game
that's a
1.
luxury. That's a luxury problem. I
That's
never
a good problem.
Yeah, that's a good problem to have. The Canes, knowing what we know about the Stanley Cup playoffs, you need that time off. I don't buy into the whole rust argument at that point. From Zach, Tony D looked decent. He was decent. That's all you asked out of me. That's you said what 15
Yeah.
minutes tonight. I had set the over under when we were joking about it earlier today at Longleaf. I set the over if we could have put it in the parlay at 13.5. I just figured it would be in that time frame. And again, he didn't screw up. Can he give you more? You're right. He can give you something more offensively. That was always his kind of distressed asset play a couple of years ago when he came in to replace Dougie Hamilton. But with the defensive pairings and what they have cooking with Orlov and Chatfield and everything else, that he just has a tough spot to be in. So I thought they managed the minutes tonight and what they were trying to do defensively pretty well. From what we got, Black Cats and Hurricanes, I would rest Freddie. He can be injury prone. Keep him fresh. I can see that angle. We've got Zeno with a completely other angle. Let Freddie decide whether he wants to play on Saturday.
Yeah, I have no problems. Again, we talked about luxury issues and problems going forward, right? Like this is exactly what Mike Maniscalco said after game 2.
Yeah.
If you get into this driver's seat position and you think at some point you will need Kochetkov, this is the kind of game you put him in because, quite frankly, if he plays well, then all of a sudden look where his confidence is. Oh, you closed out the series, right? And now you're more of in a situation of if you get into that Freddie injury situation, you feel he's more prepared, even though you already know what you're going to get at him in those emergency situations. You're probably not going to win games like this with Kochetkov. This was a Freddie special.
This was a Freddie special.
I thought Freddie was really good in game 1 too. So the mentality and the mindset there for Freddie is in a great place. And now, can you get Kochetkov there? Do you need Kochetkov there? I don't know. In terms of philosophy for the Hurricanes. But again, it's a good problem to have.
From Alex, Islanders fan, in my honest opinion, your speed and system make it impossible for the plotting Islanders to get around them. When they play the Rangers, they will have to back up some more. Yeah, look, the Islanders, we saw this in game 1. We saw it in portions of today. I mean, we certainly saw it in game 1. We saw it in portions today where they're just trying to get things to their pace. But the Canes can be relentless, as we know. And as desperate as the Islanders were in the third period, I thought the Canes did a much better job of just grinding that thing out. So I think we'll close on we'll close on that. We'll get one more happy birthday shout out for Giglio. Your last
year, Jess.
Your last year in your 40s, Joe.
This is it.
This is it, man. Let's make it a big one. We got the podcast festival announcement today.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
We got more Canes After Dark stuff that we'll be doing. Well, it'll be Canes Afternoon. What's that?
Can you even tell that it's yellow and green?
What do you have there? Oh, that's right. You got the row back. You're kicking the row back.
My row back hoodie.
Look at you. It finally arrived.
This is the one that I bought because I went through it and I was like, I need that. I like that. It'll pop more in the studio. It's like a Masters type green.
Nice.
With flags, tees, and balls on there, and then the yellow string. So
I love it.
Very, very comfortable, as you already know from your hoodie experience with the row back.
Man, I'm very excited because my shorts arrived today. Very hype about that. Skies out, thighs out on Monday when we're back in the studio, Joe.
Oh boy.
Get ready. The lighting, it's going to pop. You talk about things popping in the lighting. Let's go. Anyway, folks, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for hanging out with us on the After Dark. We will do this again on Saturday. Well, Joe will be doing this on Saturday. I will see you on Monday.
Yeah, happy anniversary.
Thank you, sir.